Welcome to the Illumination Talks again. Today we're going to look at fairy tales. And why not? I've spent a lifetime researching biblical fairy tales, so why not the real ones? Because there may be secrets to be found here too, encoded by cunning authors back in the 19th century, the early 19th century. Authors like the Brothers Grimm. And the Brothers Grimm were not simply children's authors. They were accomplished historians and linguists, researching and cataloguing ancient myths and folklore. And the Brothers Grimm wrote Snow White. And that's the first of the fairy stories we're going to have a look at. But is this really a simple children's story? Or is there a deeper meaning to this ancient tale? Well, in my new interpretation of Snow White is actually the moon. It's a story about orbital mechanics, the slow revolutions of the solar system. No, really, it actually is. So, well, let's have a look at that. We start with the Wicked Witch, who didn't like Snow White, of course. And the Wicked Witch is the faint Milky Way, who is jealous of Snow White because she is the brilliant white moon. Now, in Egyptian symbology, the Milky Way was the goddess Nut, and she arches her body across the night sky. And here she is, arching her body, with the god Geb, the earth, down below. And she is the Milky Way. And if we look at the Milky Way in the real sky, you'll see the Milky Way arches across the night sky in exactly the same way as the goddess Nut. She even has arms and legs separating at each end of her arch across the sky. It's quite clear that the ancient Egyptians saw the Milky Way as being a goddess arching her body across the skies. And it was across this cosmic sea that the solar bark of Ra sailed, because the ancients saw the heavens, the cosmos above, as being a sea, and therefore the gods sailed a boat across this sea. And we'll come across this many times in this research, where you'll see a boat being sailed across the sea, and it's sort of told as a boat sailing up the Nile or across the Mediterranean, but it's actually a boat going across the cosmic seas above, the heavens above. So, back to the fairy tale. The 7 dwarfs are actually the 7 planets, because of course in ancient times there were only 7 planets. And the planets follow the moon in a long line along the ecliptic. Just as the dwarfs followed Snow White in the fairy tale, so the 7 planets follow the moon across the night sky, following each other along the line of the ecliptic. So, the Wicked Witch, the goddess Nut, looked down from the heavens, because she's a heavenly being, of course, into her Mediterranean mirror. And she saw that she was not the brightest and most beautiful celestial body. She was being eclipsed by the Snow White moon, this young, new, bright moon, who was outshining her in the night sky. So the Wicked Witch gave Snow White moon a corset, which she put around Snow White moon and pulled tighter and tighter and tighter, until the Snow White moon got thinner and thinner and thinner. And of course, that's exactly what happens in the night sky, as the waning moon gets thinner and thinner in the night sky. Is this not the same story? Well, the corset is pulled so tight that poor Snow White moon dies. And of course, the moon, when it gets thinner and thinner, eventually becomes a new moon. and it dies. It goes black. It's dark. It's dead. Snow White has died. Until, of course, a prince comes along. Helios, the sun prince. And Helios, the sun prince, kisses the moon. And of course, that's exactly what happens in the night sky when we have an eclipse. The sun kisses the moon, or the moon kisses the sun, whichever way you like to see it. In a syzygy, as it's called in cosmology, an eclipse, a celestial marriage between the sun and the moon, between the sun prince and the celestial moon prince, Snow White. And, of course, you can't have a marriage without a diamond ring. And so the sun gives the moon a diamond ring. And here it is. After this kiss, after this marriage, of course, the moon, Snow White moon, comes back to life. So the new moon suddenly starts to grow again. She gets bigger and bigger and bigger. She comes back to life as if she is even perhaps pregnant. And of course, well, we can see that this is exactly what happens. But the sun can only do this. The sun can only kiss the moon when the moon is a new moon. You can only have a solar eclipse during a new moon, when the moon is dark and dead, just like the fairy tale says. So the orbital mechanics of this agrees with the fairy tale in all respects. Is this coincidence? Well, once is perhaps coincidence, but twice or more? Well, we'll see a few more of these. Let's have a look at Santa Claus very quickly. Now, the modern imagery of Father Christmas is also from the early 19th century. It's from the same era as the Brothers Grimm, and the same eras as Hans Christian Andersen, who wrote some of the other fairy tales we're going to look at. So here is Santa Claus, a fairly traditional sort of depiction of Santa Claus from our modern era, from the last 200 years or so. He's a man with a red coat, pulled across the skies on a sleigh drawn by 4 reindeer. But where did that symbolism come from? Who is this Santa? Is he not Helios? Have a look at Helios. He is a man with a red cloak, pulled across the skies on a chariot drawn by 4 horses. Is that not the same symbology? And of course, Santa does this. Santa has his great day at the winter solstice, the very time when the sunrise of Helios stops going towards the south and starts coming back to the north again. And when the sun does this, of course, this is the start of the new spring, of new life, of new prosperity. This is the very season that brings the new cornucopia, the horn of plenty, which was a consistent symbology throughout the Greco-Roman era. And here is the horn of plenty. But is that not the same as Santa's sock? Is not Santa's sock just the cornucopia, full of the goods and the treats, in this case given to the children, but very much the same as the horn of plenty? So the horn of plenty from ancient times, from the Greco-Roman era, has now become the sock of plenty. But it's the same imagery, it's the same symbolism. So many coincidences. And we'll see more of these later. So is this mere coincidence? Or has children's literature been infused with secret meaning? Secrets that have gone unnoticed for a century or more. Interesting, isn't it? Welcome back to the Illumination Talks. Last time we looked at a few fairy tales, and today we have some more fairy tales that may contain secrets. First of all, I want to look at Repunzel, another fairy tale gathered by the Brothers Grimm back in the early 19th century, even if the tale dates from before their time. And perhaps this also contains hidden symbolism. So, what is the story of Repunzel all about? Well, Repunzel is the lost princess, locked in a tower, who has to let down her long golden hair for her charming prince. And here she is. She's sitting in her tower with her charming prince climbing up her long golden hair. How sweet. But what is this really all about? Who is this princess? Well, the radical answer, the answer I'm going to propose here, is that she is Mary Magdalene, the princess with long golden or ginger hair. And here she is. This is Mary Magdalene with the long ginger hair, her orange robes, and her alabaster jar. And we can tell that this is the Magdalene because of this symbolic dress code and appearance, because of that long ginger hair, which is so typical for the Magdalene, because of her orange and green robes, whereas Mary the Virgin always wore blue and white, of course, and because of that alabaster jar. Now, the alabaster jar is important because it was from this jar that she anointed Jesus at the house of Simon. And this was a hugely significant ceremony and event, which is central to the biblical story and to Roman history, if you know what the ceremony really meant. So here's another painting of Mary Magdalene. And again, you can see the long ginger hair, the orange and green robes. Her vest is most definitely green there. And her alabaster jar, which is down in the bottom right-hand corner there. And this long ginger hair is important and significant because the Talmud calls Mary Magdalene Miriam Magdala Neseya, which means the dresser of ladies' hair, and is actually a play on words for Miriam Magdalene Nazarene, because the Talmud scribes knew that Mary Magdalene was a Nazarene from the Nazarene sect, the same sect as Jesus, as we've talked about in previous talks and lectures. And hair was sacred to the Nazarene. They always wore their hair long, which is why we have this imagery of Jesus with long hair and long beard, because they weren't allowed to cut their hair, except in a special circumstance for a sacrifice. And also, we'll see in a later talk that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were indeed ginger-haired, which is a controversial topic, but I'll prove this to the satisfaction of most viewers. Okay, so Repunzel is closely linked to Mary Magdalene. And so finally, we know why Repunzel was locked in a tower, because Mary Magdalene means tower. It doesn't mean she was from a fishing village on the Mediterranean. Magdalene means tower. The word comes from the Egyptian Magdal and the Aramaic Magdal, meaning tower. And the original tower that this referred to was actually the pyramids of Giza. But when these people lost access to the Giza pyramids, when they were in Judea and Syria and various other places, they built symbolic round towers all over these regions and well beyond. And we'll go through some of those round towers in a later talk and find out where they went to. So, both Repunzel and Mary Magdalene were the lady of the tower with long ginger hair. Is this coincidence? Perhaps. Okay, well, one coincidence. But how about the Little Mermaid? Well, this fairy tale was written by Hans Christian Andersen, again in the early 19th century. It's almost as if there was a secret society of children's authors, all cooperating with each other and encoding this information within their children's stories. So here she is. This is the Little Mermaid, complete, of course, with her long ginger hair. And in the Disney version, she was called Ariel, which is a Jewish name meaning the Lion of God. And of course, she was called that because of her long ginger mane, as you can see. So what's the story of Little Mermaid all about? Well, Little Mermaid falls in love with a prince, as they always do, and she saves him from drowning and hopes to marry the prince. But this is an unrequited love because the prince marries another princess. And the poor Little Mermaid dies of a broken heart and becomes one with the foam of the sea, and then becomes a princess of the air. So now we know who the Little Mermaid really is, because the foam of the sea is the name for the goddess Aphrodite. That's what Aphrodite means. And here she is. This is Aphrodite standing in the foam of the sea, which is what her name actually means. So, the Little Mermaid is actually the Greek Aphrodite, the Roman Venus. And she is linked to the goddess Nut because the foam of the sea is the Milky Way. Okay, the cosmos above is the Great Sea, and the Milky Way is the foam on that cosmic sea, and here you can see it. This is the cosmos above with the foam of the sea upon the cosmic sea, the Milky Way. And it is from the Milky Way, of course, that Aphrodite was born. That's what her name means. Now, in a similar fashion, Mary Magdalene was also linked to the goddess Isis. And yet Isis is Astarte, who is Aphrodite, who is Venus. They are all one and the same goddess. But the Little Mermaid is also linked to Aphrodite, and therefore linked to Mary Magdalene. And again, the Disney Corporation seems to have been listening to this talk because Ariel had a painting of Mary Magdalene. And here it is. And this is a very specific painting of Mary Magdalene because this is Mary Magdalene and the Smoking Flame by Georges de la Tour. And here's the original. And yet they've placed this imagery within the Disney film, next, of course, to Ariel, the Little Mermaid. So someone has consciously and deliberately linked the Little Mermaid to Mary Magdalene. Is this all coincidence? It looks like historians of the 19th century knew many of these ancient secrets and encoded them within their work, which is interesting because it means there may be many secrets out there embedded within everyday literature and even within fairy tales.